I'd like to introduce you to the story of Hope. Hope is a single mother from Nigeria. She has 3 daughters who were all born in Austria. She lived here for 10 years and worked as a cleaner. However, it was not Hope's dream to work as a cleaner. She had bigger hopes. She wanted to become a fashion designer, a designer of clothes. Unfortunately, that's not really easy in Austria, is it? You need to have a business registration, and for that business registration, you need to prove all sorts of qualifications. And you need to negotiate with Austrian bureaucrats, which is something that Hope did not really feel up to. So she decided to fulfill her dreams and go back to Nigeria and try her luck there. I work for the International Organization for Migration, and we try to help people like Hope to return back to their countries of origin and re-establish their lives there. In what we call the assisted voluntary return and reintegration programs, we help them start a new life, mostly focusing on income-generating activities so that they can sustain themselves in the long run. We offer them trainings, for instance, or help them purchase some goods or equipment so that they can start a little shop and live from that. On this next picture, you see Charles, who with our assistance bought linen and fabric, which he now sells in a busy market in Lagos, in Nigeria as well. Of course, this kind of projects needs donors, and that means that we cannot help everyone who returns. But these projects allow us to stay in contact with some of them and learn about their stories. And it's very interesting what we learn, because sometimes I find these people are not so very different from me and my friends. However, they hide tremendous stories behind them, very impressive stories, and some of them I'd like to share with you. Because Hope, you see, did not take a very easy decision. That was quite brave what she did. She returned back to Nigeria, to a country where life expectancy does not exceed 53 years, where 20 million people are unemployed. She went back to Lagos, to the biggest city in Nigeria, as a single woman. That's quite dangerous, actually. Without any connections, she's really, really vulnerable. It would also not be easy for her to return back to Austria just like that. Again, bureaucracy, you need a visa. You could not call Hope a highly qualified person either. And yet, knowing all these challenges, she decided to return. And that's quite impressive. So, who are these people who take such tough decisions? When people talk about migration, they sometimes pretend that's an easy and well-known phenomenon. They think it's about moving from A to B for one single reason. In fact, what we know from our work, it's not that easy. Very often, the motivations are mixed. Sometimes people flee hardships, they flee wars, they are refugees. Sometimes they simply want to improve their living situation. They want to have better financial means. They go abroad to study, to work. Some move for family reasons. I bet some of you also have moved in another country. The United Nations defines an international migrant as someone who has lived abroad for more than a year. We think that there is about 230 million people who fall into this category. That's quite a number, isn't it? In fact, it's 3% of the world population. If you'd put all these people together in one country, it would be the 5th most populated country in the world. But you can be a migrant without crossing borders. If you've moved from a city or an area to another area, you could be called an internal migrant, because you may have had quite the migration experience, not knowing people, not knowing where to buy cheap food, not knowing where to rent, feeling quite helpless, finding people behaving a bit differently than people back at home. And interestingly, that's the same that can happen to people who return. But why do people return? Again, a number of reasons can come together. Many people, when they first move from A to B, they have set goals. And once they have achieved them, they decide to return because they had always intended to do so. Some people, however, realize that they will not be able to achieve their aims. They will not learn the language as they thought they could. They will not find a job. And then they decide to return because they perceive the migration as a failure. Some people are just not allowed to stay legally in the country they move to. Some people ask for asylum and are rejected. It's not very easy to come to Europe these days if you're not a highly qualified migrant. And then the people have to leave again. Sometimes, of course, the situation in the country of origin also improves and you'd like to be there rather than here. Sometimes the situation in the host country, in the country where you currently are, has changed. When the economic crisis hit Spain, for instance, quite a number of migrants left the country again. Some people move back because they don't like the life they live here any longer. They are faced with challenges not only linked to language or not learning the language well. Some employers ask perfect accents for them to be employed. Some people encounter experiences of xenophobia that they don't really enjoy, and that makes them go back. Some people don't like the weather, mind you. I mean, that's also a reason for going back. Some people simply miss home, of course. I mean, probably most of you have had this experience. Many people tell us, in fact, that they go back for family reasons, because the mother, for instance, has fallen sick and needs someone to take care of her, or the family father has died, and then someone has to take over his responsibilities. And then people decide to return back. Now, those of you who've had a migration experience, I bet there's someone who also had the typical return experience. If you've moved, for instance, to Vienna to study there and moved back to Linz to work here, you might find that things have changed, like the people are not the same any longer, or maybe they haven't changed at all, and that can be equally frustrating because you have changed and have improved, of course. And that's very interesting because people tend to think returning back home is so easy. I mean, you know home, right? I mean, that's something we all can connect to. But home is not always the same when we return to it. As I said, things have changed, the society has changed. But many returnees face also other difficulties. For instance, if they don't have any connections any longer because they've been away for too long. In some countries, it's quite crucial to have good connections, to find a proper job, to find proper living places. And if you've been gone for far too long, then you may not have all these connections any longer, and that can be a huge disadvantage. Some of our returnees are also faced with huge expectations on the sides of their family. These families sometimes have put together all their financial means to make that migration to Europe happen. Sometimes even the whole neighborhood has contributed. And of course, they expect success. They don't expect someone to return with empty hands. Sometimes there's debts that need to be paid off as well. And many returnees don't like to go back and look into the faces of their dear ones and tell them, I have failed. Sometimes they choose to go back to another part of the country because they cannot face their family members. Some of them are also faced with resentment. You have left the country when your country needed you most. I stayed here while it was burst and you went away, you took the easy road. That is something that many of our returnees hear, and it's not easy to face that as well. Sometimes the situation of the whole country can be affected. If you imagine that 5.7 million Afghan refugees came back to Afghanistan after 2002, like that's a fourth of the population, can you imagine what that means for the economy, all the competition for resources, for jobs? That can put a country into distress as well and add to the feeling of not really being welcome back at home. And still, despite all of these challenges, people decide to return back home. Like Ahmed, for instance. Ahmed came from Afghanistan to Austria because he had to support his family. His two parents are not in a position to work, and he has a big family, a lot of siblings that need to be taken care of. And Ahmed came to Austria to find work. He was an asylum seeker and was not allowed to work, so after a year he decided to return home. We assisted him, we bought him a flock of sheep, which you can see in the picture, very pretty sheep. And Ahmed is now in a position to support his whole family financially. I mean, that young man, he bears quite a responsibility. And he's now, fortunately, in a position to do that. But that responsibility is something that we encounter a lot in migrants. Those that are here and those that return. They don't only take care of themselves, like many of us do. They have huge responsibilities for families, sometimes for extended families like we're not used to, for uncles, for aunts, for nieces, for nephews, whatever. And they bear it with a lot of courage, just like Hope. Here you have Hope again, and you see her holding up some dresses that she has designed. I met Hope in August last year in Lagos. She had just settled in. She had rented a little shop close to the school of her daughters. And she had started working. She had designed the first designs and hired a seamstress to finish the dresses. Mind you, that's not a finished dress yet. I expect it's finished by now, but at that time she was still in the process. You can see her smiling. She was quite hopeful at that time, and it was very encouraging to see her. I don't know whether she will ultimately succeed, of course, and I've heard that recently she had some health problems that would be easily treatable in Austria without any problems. Not so easily in Nigeria, however. But I was inspired by her story because that's a story of courage. And Hope is not the only one of the returnees that we see that have these hardships and these challenges to encounter, and yet they keep smiling, and yet they do their best to fulfill their responsibilities, to support their families, and to contribute to their communities. And I'm quite proud to have met Hope, and I hope you liked your story, and I hope that you can also be inspired by her and the likes of her. Thank you.